Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to have on as a guest today Miss Harmeet Dhillon. Now, you probably have heard her name in the news a lot for various things over the last few years, but we have her on today specifically in her role as president and founder of the Center for American Liberty. Now, Harmeet, you are an attorney. You also have a law firm. And one of the big projects that you and your firm and your group are taking on right now is the fight against what we're seeing, this social contagion in America of young people transitioning their genders. So we know that you're representing Chloe Cole and some other detransitioners. And so could you just start out sharing with our listeners a little bit about the work that you're doing with your nonprofit and how you're going about supporting these transitioners in their fight for justice?
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to talk about this very important issue. So, at my law firm, I've been practicing law in various settings for 30 years, and throughout that time, I've done work on behalf of victims of domestic violence, sex trafficking, human rights violations that are national and international in scope, as well as a number of First Amendment and other American legal and political issues. And so, started the nonprofit 4 years ago for American Liberty to be able to fund the important work that we do, because many of our clients have fundamental cases that are not only important to them, but also, if successful, can have a huge impact on society. But for example, teenagers or young people who are detransitioning, they typically don't have the resources to hire a lawyer who has the skills to take these cases all the way. And so that's where the nonprofit comes in, because there are a lot of generous Americans. It's an amazing country and culture. It's really unique in the sense that a lot of the important work in this country is funded by public spirited citizens who use nonprofits to help these important causes. And so in court every day, I help people in the pro-life movement and other movements, and it's usually funded by charitable contributions. So in this case, we started this nonprofit, and we did not know when we started it that our work would include this. Our work was more broadly defined as free speech and other fundamental First Amendment and other issues related to that. And so we come to this point, constitutional work. And, however, like I said, the first case I won as a lawyer at trial was a case involving human rights violations abroad. And so I view what's happening to America's children who are being subjected to this contagion, and it's mainly girls who are succumbing to it as children, as a human rights issue, because these children are put in the care of adults with authority. That's teachers and doctors, psychiatrists, and guidance counselors. And it's typically not the parents pressuring them to do it. It's something that they picked up either through our frankly abusive and addictive social media companies in America, or more frequently, we see now the schools. We see a concerted effort, a well-funded effort by LGBTQ nonprofits and other social engineering organizations to push this ideology in the schools. And, to be very clear, we don't have anything to do with adults who want to make these choices for themselves. But I think children are very different. They are protected by law. They don't have the same rights as adults. They can't serve in the military. They can't buy a gun. They can't, vote. And yet we are allowing children who are being pressured by a well-funded establishment to make the choice to mutilate their bodies permanently, destroy their ability to recreate, and make them unhappy in most cases permanently, because it is a lie that you can change your body from male to female. There's no amount of hormones or sex mimicry surgery that can do that. For whatever reason, the medical establishment has been peddling this lie to children for the last couple of decades, and the result is widespread misery and permanent damage and suicide amongst a lot of these youth. So that's the cause that we took up.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think is so strange. First of all, I'm surprised to hear you say that the parents aren't pushing it. I half expected it to be more from the parents necessarily than from institutions. But the thing that we hear all the time is that these therapists or teachers are saying, well, would you rather have, a happy, son or daughter, the opposite gender of what they currently have, or a dead one, right? They're manipulating parents using this awful rhetoric to scare them into transitioning their kids. But it's like, okay, well, if they're 50% likely to end their lives because of misery before they transition and 50% after they transition, it doesn't sound like transitioning is the answer.
Well, so first of all, there are a few psychologically challenged moms who are pushing this at a younger age. More commonly, what we've seen is it is something that the children themselves pick up through social media or through pressure in the schools. And we've had multiple cases involving, even before we got to the surgical cases, we've had cases, and one of which is ongoing in the Ninth Circuit right now, cases involving teachers and other workers in the schools, not only manipulating children to change their gender, it's to start with the baby step of encouraging them to call themselves bisexual or gay. I've been talking about 12-year-olds and younger than that even. And then next, they're like, oh, well, if you're not happy in your body, maybe you should be the other side. But most importantly in those cases, concealing that whole discussion and the child's manipulated choice to change their name or what have you from the parents. And so the parents don't find out what's going on until it's too late. And add insult to injury, California actually has a law that allows these children to basically run away from home legally and check into some LGBTQ group home and get quote unquote counseling there. And then they never go back to their families because they're in the thrall of this, frankly, gender cult. And so these are some of the things that lead up to this. And so we actually won a case recently this year regarding the schools manipulating a child. Thankfully, the mom found out during COVID because the kid was at home and the girl is back to being her normal self. Similar case were appealing in the Ninth Circuit that reached the opposite result, where a federal judge said parents don't have any right to know what's going on with their children in the schools. I think that is not only wrong morally and natural law, it's also wrong under Supreme Court precedent. So we're seeking the reversal of the circuit.
That's wild to me. Now, how are the schools getting around being mandatory reporters? This is one of the things that I found so strange. We have family in education, schools, counselors, people like that are what are my understanding mandatory reporters, which means if a child is either hurting themselves, threatening to hurt themselves, if somebody's hurting them, teachers, guidance counselors, therapists, these people are supposed to tell the parents or the police. They're mandatory reporters. How are they getting around some of these rules, or are they just disregarding them?
Well, they don't view themselves as putting the children at risk. They view themselves as helping the children. So there's nothing to report in that analysis. They're the ones doing the grooming. So how are they going to report on themselves? So, I think that's fairly obvious. But, the net result of this is you add government funding paying for this in the case of parents who don't have means or private healthcare paying for it and prioritizing it. And two of our lawsuits were suing Kaiser for doing the surgery, and the third lawsuit we're suing a major university in that state whose medical establishment did these mutilating procedures, in these cases removing the breasts, healthy breast tissue from otherwise healthy girls. One of the big failures that we're seeing, just transitioning over to the medical industry side of this, is almost all of the patients who we have spoken to who are considering suing the medical providers, they had undiagnosed or improperly diagnosed psychiatric issues, developmental challenges. Many of them have been subjected to some level of sexual assault as girls in their youth, in the schools, or some relative. And doctors never asked them about that. They never asked them, why are you so fixated on becoming a boy? These are pretty simple reasons and reactions. A lot of these girls are somewhere on the autism spectrum, and they have difficulty expressing what's really going on. And so adults are projecting their issues onto these children. If, and, you know, I don't know how it is now, but I know in olden days, before a doctor would sign off on bariatric surgery or major plastic surgery, they would make a patient go through a course of exercise and psychiatric evaluation and make sure that a distorted body image wasn't the issue. None of that is happening. These children are being fast-tracked, and some of these surgeries took place during COVID. They're being fast-tracked into the removal of their healthy breasts, and then not vaginoplasty, but penile implants in the case of girls, vaginoplasty in the case of boys. None of this results in a normal sexual body of the opposite gender. It is just living as something that you're not. And it is frankly barbaric to do this to children after compounding their problems by misdiagnosing them, not diagnosing them, allowing the grooming and manipulation of adults to be the guiding principle of this child mutilation. Child genital mutilation is what it is happening in America's hospitals.
Well, and that's, to me, all of this is, there's no way for any of these young people to have informed consent for what they're getting into. If they are not of the age of majority, if they've never had, I'm going to be real talk right now. If they've never had sex, if they've never experienced an orgasm, if they've never had a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship in nature, how can they have informed consent about changing their gender and manipulating their genitals?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of our arguments. These children at that age are not allowed to get tattoos. They're viewed as too immature to be able to market their own bodies. Yet, with pressure on parents who do have to sign off in most cases, not always, on these surgeries, parents are manipulated into a false presumption that their child will commit suicide if they don't sign off on this. This is actually usually not the case, but psychiatrists are involved maybe for an hour or two in this whole process. There ought to be a legal requirement, in my opinion, of years of psychiatric counseling before one does this. And we've even spoken to some experts who have counseled adults on adult sex mimicry surgery, and that was the medical protocol not that long ago, that before anybody would interfere, even with a healthy adult's body, they would ask them to go through a period of psychiatric counseling, eliminate all other options, make sure that person is comfortable living in the clothing of and behaving as the opposite gender for a period of years before they would mutilate that adult. And yet, children, it is just being done on an assembly line, 1 or 2 hours of counseling, and boom, the breast surgery is scheduled at the Oakland Kaiser here in California because there's a couple of doctors willing to do it there, whereas like most doctors actually won't. And then when inevitably they have problems with their transition, i.e. whatever their psychiatric problems are not resolved, and now they feel horrible when they look in the mirror. And then they learn, which they probably was in some fine print, but they learn because it's coming home to them, they'll never be able to breastfeed. They'll never be able to maybe even reproduce, have children. So forget about breastfeeding. And they can't have, their body isn't what God made it. And so they feel ugly. And this is horrible that adults in America are doing this with impunity to children. And we aim to put a stop to it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, this was years ago, and I remember thinking to myself, this is going to go bad. I don't know how this is going to go bad, but I know this is going to go bad. It was several years ago. Many states in the Northeast, I'm from Vermont originally, so you probably are familiar. The Northeast seems to really be with a lot of this stuff, along with California. But they outlawed, I'm trying to remember the language that they used, but it was essentially they outlawed therapy and
Conversion
forgive
therapy.
me. Yes. Yes, that's what it was. And it was supposed to be like you're not allowed to talk to people about, who identify as homosexual, to double check if they're really homosexual. So my understanding is that therapists aren't in states where they've outlawed so-called conversion therapy. They're not even allowed to talk to these young people about, well, hey, are you sure you really want to be a boy or a girl or whatever? That it's like that counseling's actually outlawed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Have you
that's
found that
true.
in any of the cases
Well,
you're
yeah, I mean,
working
but
on?
that conversion therapy ought to be, I mean, it's a legal theory we've looked at as maybe what the schools are doing is conversion therapy. They're converting normal,
Oh,
healthy children into something else. And, maybe that should be, I certainly think the case where we reached the $100,000 settlement with the Spreckles Union School District was a case of
okay.
taking a normal child and putting ideas into her head and converting her into something else. And that it turns out
Interesting.
that one of the teachers who was involved in this had some LGBTQ issue in their family, and they were projecting their own insecurities and failures as a
Oh,
parent
wow.
onto a child. And so yeah, that if you to complain, we can use the conversion therapy angle there as well. But look, bottom line, what I want to make
Fascinating.
it very costly for doctors to mutilate children in America.
Yes.
That's what I would like to see
Yes.
happen. And teachers to interfere with children. And amateur psychology and psychiatry happening in the schools with, random guidance counselors who don't have the expertise and ability to be able to diagnose these things, to be
Mm.
stopped from doing it. They should not dabble in ruining the lives of other people's children.
We're so grateful for you, Harmeet, and the work that you are doing with your organization, the Center for American Liberty. We're grateful for the Dhillon Law Group. Tell our listeners and our viewers where they can go to support you, to support the work that you're doing, to follow you. Share with them all of the, where they can donate and how they can follow you.
Sure. Well, on Twitter, I can be followed at PNJABAN. And our nonprofit, the Center for American Liberty, is www.libertycenter.org. And people can donate there as well under the donate tab. And, if anyone wants to look at what my law firm is doing recently, also we have a Twitter and Instagram profile at Dhillon Law, spelled DHILLONLAW. And our website is dhillonlaw.com.
Fantastic. Again, Harmeet Dhillon, thank you so much for being on with us today. Thank you for the work that you're doing, helping detransitioners and Americans in general fight this social contagion. We'll look forward to having you on again soon
I appreciate it.
and
Thank you.
hearing about how these goes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Take care.